Henry Ford was an American industrialist, business magnate, and founder of the Ford Motor Company, and chief developer of the assembly line technique of mass production. By creating the first automobile that middle-class Americans could afford, he converted the automobile from an expensive curiosity into an accessible conveyance that profoundly impacted the landscape of the 20th century. His introduction of the Ford Model T automobile revolutionized transportation and American industry. As the Ford Motor Company owner, he became one of the richest and best-known people in the world. He is credited with Fordism, mass production of inexpensive goods coupled with high wages for workers. Ford had a global vision, with consumerism as the key to peace. His intense commitment to systematically lowering costs resulted in many technical and business innovations, including a franchise system that put dealership throughout North America and major cities on 6 continents. Ford left most of his vast wealth to the Ford Foundation and arranged for his family to permanently control it. Ford was also widely known for his pacifism during the first years of World War I, and for promoting anti-Semitic content, including the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, through his newspaper The Dearborn Independent, and the book The International Jew. Henry Ford was born July 30, 1863, on a farm in Springwells Township, Michigan. His father, William Ford (1826–1905), was born in County Cork, Ireland, to a family that had emigrated from Somerset, England in the 16th century. His mother, Mary Ford née Lydigot, (1839–1876), was born in Michigan as the youngest child of Belgian immigrants. Her parents died when she was a child and she was adopted by neighbors, the O'Hearns. Henry Ford's siblings were Margaret Ford (1867–1938), Jane Ford (1868–1945), William Ford (1871–1917), and Robert Ford (1873–1934). His father gave him a pocket watch in his early teens. At 15, Ford dismantled and reassembled the timepieces of friends and neighbors dozens of times, gaining the reputation of a watch repairman. At 20, Ford walked 4 miles to their Episcopal church every Sunday. Ford was devastated when his mother died in 1876. His father expected him to take over the family farm eventually, but the despised farm work. He later wrote, "I never had any particular love for the farm, it was the mother on the farm I loved." In 1879, Ford left home to work as an apprentice machinist in Detroit, first with James F. Flower and Bros., and later with the Detroit Dry Dock Co. In 1882, he returned to Dearborn to work on the family farm, where he became adept at operating the Westinghouse portable steam engine. He was later hired by Westinghouse to service their steam engines. During this period, Ford also studied bookkeeping at Goldsmith, Bryant and Stratton Business College in Detroit. Ford stated 2 significant events occurred in 1875, when he was 12. He received a watch, and he witnessed the operation of a Nichols and Shepard road engine, the first vehicle other than horse-drawn that I had ever seen. In his farm workshop, Ford built a steam wagon or tractor and a steam car, but thought steam was not suitable for light vehicles, as the boiler was dangerous. Ford also said that he did not see the use of experimenting with electricity, due to the expense of trolley wires, and no storage battery was in sight of a weight that was practical. In 1885, Ford repaired an Otto engine, and in 1887 he built a 4-cycle model with a 1-inch bore and a 3-inch stroke. In 1890, Ford started work on a 2-cylinder engine. Ford stated, "In 1892, I completed my first motor car, powered by a 2-cylinder, 4-horsepower motor, with a 2.5-inch bore and a 6-inch stroke, which was connected to a countershaft by a belt and then to the rear wheel by a chain. The belt was shifted by a clutch lever to control speeds at 10 or 20 miles per hour, augmented by a throttle. Other features included 28-inch wire bicycle wheels with rubber tires, a foot brake, a 3-gallon gasoline tank, and later, a water jacket around the cylinders for cooling." Ford added that in the spring of 1893 the machines was running to my partial satisfaction and giving an opportunity further to test out the design and material on the road. Between 1895 and 1896, Ford drove that machine about 1,000 miles. He then started a second car in 1896, eventually building 3 of them in his home workshop. Ford married Clara Jane Bryant, 1866–1950, on April 11, 1888, and supported himself by farming and running a sawmill. They had 1 child, Edsel Ford, 1893–1943. In 1891, Ford became an engineer with the Edison Illuminating Company of Detroit. After his promotion to chief engineer in 1893, he had enough time and money to devote attention to his experiments on gasoline engines. These experiments culminated in 1896 with the completion of a self-propelled vehicle, which he named the Ford Quadricycle. He test drove it in June 4. After various test drives, Ford brainstormed ways to improve the quadricycle. Also in 1896, Ford attended a meeting of Edison executives, where he was introduced to Thomas Edison. Edison approved of Ford's automobile experimentation. Encouraged by Edison, Ford designed and built a second vehicle, completing it in 1898. Backed by the capital of Detroit lumber baron William H. Murphy, Ford resigned from the Edison Company and founded the Detroit Automobile Company. On August 5, 1899. However, the automobiles produced were of a lower quality and higher price than Ford wanted. Ultimately, the company was not successful and was dissolved in January 1901. With the help of C. Harold Wills, Ford designed, built, and successfully raced a 26-horsepower automobile in October 1901. With this success, Murphy and other stockholders in the Detroit Automobile Company formed the Henry Ford Company. On November 30, 1901, with Ford as chief engineer. In 1902, Murphy brought in Henry M. Leland as consultant. Ford in response, left the company bearing his name. With Ford gone, Leland renamed the company the Cadillac Automobile Company. Teaming up with former racing cyclist Tom Cooper, Ford also produced the 80-horsepower Racer 999, which Barney Oldfield was to drive to victory in a race in October 1902. Ford received the backing of an old acquaintance, Alexander Y. Malcolmson, a Detroit area coal dealer. They formed a partnership, Ford and Malcolmson Limited, to manufacture automobiles. Ford went to work designing an inexpensive automobile, and the duo leased a factory and contracted with a machine shop owned by John and Horace E. Dodge to supply over $160,000 in parts. Sales were slow, and a crisis arose when the Dodge brothers demanded payment for their first shipment. When Edsel Ford, president of Ford Motor Company, died of cancer in May 1943, the elderly and ailing Henry Ford decided to assume the presidency. By this point, Ford, nearing 80 years old, had several cardiovascular events, variously cited as heart attacks or strokes, and was mentally inconsistent, suspicious, and generally no longer fit for such immense responsibilities. Most of the directors did not want to see him as president. But for the previous 20 years, though he had long been without any official executive title, he had always had de facto control over the company. The board and the management had never seriously defied him, and this time was no different. The directors elected him, and he served until the end of the war. During this period the company began to decline, losing more than $10 million a month, $147,750,000 today. The administration of President Franklin Roosevelt had been considering a government takeover of the company in order to ensure continued war production, but the idea never progressed. His health failing, Ford ceded the company presidency to his grandson Henry Ford II in September 1945 and retired. He died on April 7, 1947, of a cerebral hemorrhage at Fair Lane, his estate in Dearborn, at the age of 83. A public viewing was held at Greenfield Village where up 5,000 people per hour filed past the casket. Funeral services were held in Detroit's Cathedral Church of St. Paul and he was buried in the Ford Cemetery in Detroit. A compendium of short biographies of famous Freemasons, published by a Freemason lodge, lists Ford as a member. The Grand Lodge of New York confirms that Ford was a Freemason, and was raised in Palestine Lodge No. 357 Detroit, in 1894. When he received the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite in 1940, he said, "Masonry is the best balance wheel the United States has." In 1923, Ford's pastor, and head of his sociology department, Episcopal minister Samuel S. Marquis, claimed that Ford believed or once believed in reincarnation. Ford published an anti-smoking book, circulated to youth in 1914, called The Case Against the Little White Slaver, which documented many dangers of cigarette smoking attested to by many researchers and luminaries. At the time, smoking was ubiquitous and not yet widely associated with health problems, making Ford's opposition to cigarettes unusual. A big thank you to all of you for watching.